In the film's introduction, we're told that according to legends, there have been people in our world who created such true music that it could conjure spirits from the past and future. Not only that this gift could bring fame and fortune, but it also blurred the line between the living and the dead. Worst of all, this music could attract evil. Since ancient times, such people were called by different names, like fire people, etc. After this intro, we meet Sammy, a young man badly injured, holding a broken guitar in a church. Seeing Sammy in this state, the church folks panic, and the pastor begins praying for him, urging him to abandon music and flee from evil. Sammy seems haunted by strange nightmares, hinting that something terrifying happened the previous night. The scene then cuts to a day earlier, October 15th to 16th, 1932. We see Sammy finishing his chores and picking up his guitar from the church. The pastor, who we saw earlier, is also Sammy's father, disapproving of his musical hobby. In fact, he considers music a demonic force. But Sammy isn't just passionate, he's exceptionally talented, especially in blues music. Quick note, blues is a soulful, emotional genre developed by African American communities in the 19th century southern U.S., characterized by slow tempo, deep lyrics, and guitar/harmonica melodies reflecting pain and struggle. Many consider it the foundation of rock, jazz, and R&B. The focus then shifts to twin brothers, Smoke and Stack, World War I veterans who've returned to their Mississippi village after making money in Chicago's gangs. They plan to open a juke joint, an informal spot for music, dance, drinks, and gambling, primarily for African Americans. They buy a property from a racist white man, Hogwood, who disrespects them despite their wealth. Next, they recruit talent. Sammy, their cousin, to sing and play guitar. Delta Slim, a harmonica and piano virtuoso. Parleen, a singer Sammy clearly has a crush on. Cornbread, an old friend hired as the bouncer. Grace and Bo, Chinese shopkeepers to handle catering. Meanwhile, Stack reconnects with his ex, Mary, who's half black, half white, now part of the white community. She's upset he never contacted her after leaving. The film heavily emphasizes 1930s racism. Smoke argues with his wife, Annie, over her occult rituals, which she claims protect them. Their tension stems from the death of their infant daughter, a trauma Smoke still carries, though he wears her talisman. Parallelly, we meet Remick, an injured Irish immigrant vampire who takes shelter with a couple, Bert and Joan. When vampire hunters come searching, Joan lies to protect him. At sunset, Remick, revealed to be a vampire, bites Joan, turning her into one too. The scene cuts to the young woman screaming, implying she's now been attacked and turned into a vampire. The juke joint is finally operational, and tonight's the grand opening. Despite being twins, their personalities clash. Smoke is serious, business-minded, and strict, even about entry fees. Stack is fun-loving, emotional, and convinces Smoke to let in their broke community members. Inside the juke joint, Sammy and Delta Slim perform blues so powerful it visibly conjures spirits, just like the intro warned. Parleen, Sammy's crush, Mary, Stack's ex, Grace and Bo, handling food and drinks, and Cornbread, security, are all present. The vibe is electric, dancing, gambling, and zero racism, for now. Remick, the Irish vampire, and his newly turned victims, Joan and Bert, are drawn to Sammy's true music. They ask to enter, but Smoke denies them, partly because they're white, partly because they're suspicious. Remick leaves, but lingers outside, singing eerily. Meanwhile, Sammy and Parleen get intimate. Mary confronts Stack about abandoning her. Tensions rise between Smoke and Sammy. Outside, Mary is lured by Remick's offer of gold coins for entry, but his dripping saliva gives him away. He attacks her, turning her into a vampire. Later, Mary seduces Stack inside the joint and bites him, killing him. Smoke shoots her, but bullets have no effect. She laughs and flees. Smoke is devastated. Annie, his occultist wife, explains it's vampirism. They can't enter without invitation, and only silver or wooden stakes or garlic can kill them. Cornbread is turned off screen and returns, asking for his wages. When Smoke reaches to pay, Cornbread tries to bite him. Smoke fights back, but the vampires are multiplying. Stack reanimates as a vampire, but Annie douses him in garlic pickle juice, forcing him to flee. Only a few humans remain: Smoke, Annie, Sammy, Delta Slim, Parlene, and Grace. Outside, the turned vampires, including Bo and Cornbread, dance tauntingly. Remic's offer. He urges them to embrace vampirism, no racism, immortality, freedom. He reveals Bert and Joan were part of Hogwood's racist clan, planning to kill Smoke and Stack and steal their money at dawn. Society will never respect you, no matter how rich you are. Now this offer was tempting, but Smoke and the rest of the people don't accept it, and in such a situation, Remick says that he only wants Sammy, after which he'll leave them. Actually, there was magic in Sammy's song that could shake both old and new spirits. That's what greatly impressed Remick. So yes, he wanted Sammy. But of course, they don't hand over Sammy, which indicates that a full-on war is about to begin. Here, Grace was already furious about Bo's death, and salt gets rubbed on the wound when Remick says he will attack Grace's daughter, who is currently at her home. Hearing this, Grace loses control and challenges the vampires. Now, upon being challenged, the vampires can enter because it kind of becomes an invitation, and then an all-out war actually breaks out. In this fight, Annie, Grace, and Delta Slim all get killed. In fact, Delta Slim sacrifices himself to save Sammy, Smoke, and Praline. Mary, who is already a vampire, is shattered by Annie's death and runs off in shock. This is very tragic because Stuck had bitten Annie, turning her into a vampire too. And so Smoke had to stake Annie through the heart with a wooden stake, which was very emotional. After that, Sammy and Praline try to escape from there, but Remick and Stuck surround them midway. Smoke also arrives, and then a brutal fight occurs between Smoke and Stuck. Meanwhile, Sammy and Praline face Remick. During the fight, a vampire bites Praline, and before dying, she pleads with Sammy to run away and save himself. Sammy tries to escape by car, but Remick blocks his way. Here, all the vampires are standing with Remick, and Sammy was about to be finished off. But at the last moment, Sammy picks up his guitar and smashes it on Remick's head, and mostly Sammy's guitar had a silver plate which gets embedded in Remick's skull. It doesn't kill Remick, but causes him a lot of pain. In fact, we also see the other converted vampires writhe in pain. Before Remick can retaliate, Smoke arrives and finally finishes Remick off with a wooden stake. Just a few seconds later, sunrise starts, and all the vampires burn and get destroyed. If you remember, Smoke had clashed with his brother Stack, who was a vampire, and in that fight, Smoke was almost about to finish off Stack, but it isn't shown whether Stack is actually finished or not. So yes, if you're wondering what happened to Stack, well, you'll get clarity on that in just a bit. Anyway, here Smoke tells Sammy to run away quickly, because at sunrise, Hawkwood and his clan were about to arrive. Sammy runs away, and shortly after, Hawkwood and his clan arrive. Smoke alone with guns takes them on. In fact, he manages to kill them all, although in the process he gets badly injured himself, and in his final breaths, he sees a lovely vision of Annie and her daughter, and in the end, due to his injuries, he passes away. Meanwhile, Sammy, who is exhausted and drowned in sorrow, returns to his father's church. Now this is the same first scene of the movie, which I initially narrated to you. Sammy's father, who is a pastor, tells him to leave music and choose salvation. But Sammy refuses, picks up his guitar and leaves the church, meaning only the handle of the guitar was left. The film ends right there. There is one mid-credit scene and one post-credit scene in the movie. The mid-credit scene is very important, which I'll explain. The mid-credit scene is Set 60 years later, in 1992, when we're shown a scene in Chicago. Here we see the old Sammy, who has now become a famous blues musician. Stack and Mary arrive to meet him. Yes, Stack reveals that night at the juke joint, Smoke spared his life, but Smoke had one condition: that Stack would always let Sammy live a peaceful life. So Stack kept his promise and never harmed Sammy. Although now, Stack and Mary offer Sammy immortality. That is, they offer to turn him into a vampire because Sammy didn't have much time left due to his old age. In fact, we see that Stack and Mary still look the same even after 60 years. Just like they did in 1932, still young. Sammy politely declines the offer of immortality. Before leaving, Stack tells him to play a song and Sammy picks up his guitar and starts playing. As Stack and Mary start leaving, Sammy tells them that the nightmares of that night still don't leave him, but he also remembers that the day before that night was the best day of his life. Stack agrees and says it was his best day too, because it was the last day he saw his brother. Then it was also the last day he could feel sunlight, and it was the last day he had real freedom. The mid-credit scene ends there. And in the post-credit, we see young Sammy playing guitar, and that day was mostly the day before that horrific night I was talking about. This was the story of the movie Sinners, and though the story was quite linear, still one of the best because of its cultural references and how racism was also portrayed. First of all, if we look at Smoke and Stack, we can clearly see how even after having money, they weren't getting respect in society from white people. In fact, Hawkwood spit seeing them and was planning to come back the next day to finish them off and take their money. Then Remake also explains how vampirism is the escape because there everyone is equal, no discrimination. Although, if we look deeper, even vampires are a kind of community that is against humans and how their virus is spreading. So vampirism delivers two messages: equality as well as how they're feeding off others. Sinners is not just a supernatural horror film, but it also explores the deep-rooted racism and cultural struggle of 1930s America. The film's backdrop is the Mississippi Delta, where on one side African American people are trying to keep their identity alive through music and culture, while on the other hand they're facing white supremacist groups and social inequality. The film shows how music, especially blues, was a kind of spiritual weapon that gave people temporary escape from suffering and discrimination. That's why here music is shown as something that summons both old and new spirits, referencing that music ties them all against oppression across generations. The vampires, who are the villains in this film, are not shown as just blood-sucking monsters. They're a metaphor for systematic oppression, racism, and exploitation. When the vampiric grunt Remake turns the local Klansman into a vampire, that scene is a chilling commentary on how hate and violence pass from one generation to the next. That's why I said vampirism in this film depicts two things, depending on your lens. Another interesting trivia. Director Ryan Coogler listened to rare recordings of original blues musicians to authentically design the dialogue and background for the 1930s Delta environment. The juke joint set shown was actually shot in an abandoned Mississippi barn, which the production team restored for an old-school vibe. One more subtle detail, the relationship between Stack and Smoke mirrors both racial and personal conflict, meaning the two brothers live with different dreams and realities, but the pressure from the world on both is the same. This film blends supernatural horror and real-world racism so seamlessly that the audience doesn't just get scared. They're also forced to think about how sometimes society's monsters are more dangerous than actual humans. Sinners hides many such deep and interesting details that make the film even richer, and to fully understand them, you'll have to actually watch the film. Like Michael B. Jordan's dual roles, both Stack and Smoke are played by the same actor. But their body language and accent are so different that after the film starts, you never feel that it's the same actor playing both roles. Yes, their faces are the same, but still, there's a big difference between the two characters. The craziest thing is that Stack's guitar case, which is shown repeatedly in the film, has a small sticker that says "free but not free," which symbolically reflects the real-life struggles of the Black community even after slavery ended. Modern producers, while remixing real 1930s blues recordings, deliberately left static and recording hiss so the audience would feel like they're listening to an old dusty vinyl. Remix character was also written with a twist. He's an Irish immigrant vampire who turns the local clans into vampires, and that scene subtly reflects how the cycle of hate and power continues generation after generation, whether in the human world or the vampire world.